clarification that
Yes.
I don't work at Waweza.
Okay.
I work at the car. Yes.
I think we lost you a bit. Please say it again.
Thank you. My name is Amos Kaburu.
Yes.
I work at the PAL network as the program.
All right. So let's get into it. What is your take? Let's just start from the beginning on the measure that was taken by the CS to close schools and promise that we will not reopen until next year. But then clearly there seems to be the situations are changing and they are re-evaluating that move. So what is your take on the decision that was made and how we're progressing on this matter? Because he has been accused a lot of not being consistent.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that the decision that was made was a very personal decision to close down schools. Because the last time the world confronted a pandemic was close to a century back. And so we had got a clear pathway or other framework of how to confront pandemics which are of that kind of magnitude. And so the way COVID was presented, and we had seen what was happening in Italy, and looking at our fragile healthcare system, we admit that if we allowed this one to permeate and reach schools, it will be catastrophic. And so it was logical, it was reasonable for us to have these unprecedented types of closures that we had. That was a bold move, the first one. Now, after that, the ministry also started off quite well. It started by engaging stakeholders. It was one of the highly consultative processes. I have lots of reservations around the use of task forces and commissions in terms of public policy, but at this point in time, that's what we have normalized. So the Sarah Ruto-led committee that was supposed to advise on reopening of schools also had another mandate, which was to look at what happens after schools reopen. And it's important that we put this background so that Kenyans come to understand why now we are in a terrible challenge that we seem not to have learned much from COVID. So one of the things that the ministry has faltered is to link what is happening with the Sarah Ruto-led committee, what is happening in COVID, and relate it with another process, which is the Fatuma Shege-led committee that has actually been working on how to operationalize CBC. Because there are two possible scenarios of reopening schools. The first one is where you gravitate towards the old normal, where you argue that for schools to be operational, you need to have very low infection rates. That means that your level of investment in education will not be a lot. And that's why we always argued for numbers have to decrease before you reopen schools, which is a very realistic view, considering that we do not have a lot of resources that we can pump into education. Now we have a new way of thinking, which is saying that there is something called a new normal. And a new normal will be one in which we now admit that perhaps classroom sizes have to be small and such. So if you have to take that approach, which the Sarah Ruto-led task force realized that majority of the parents were of the view that schools should continue, but on condition that we are able to meet certain things. And what are some of these things? Ensure there is social distancing, there are masks, there are sanitizers, there are thermoguns and such. And from a very simple calculation, this will require not less than an additional 50 billion injection.
Not very realistic given our situation.
Not readily available.
Let's bring in Mr. Otoa.
Towards the old normal to say that infections have to be low before we reopen.
Let's bring in Mr. Otoa to tell us his take on this one.
Because when the numbers seem to come low, the ministry will be like, we are considering the possibilities. So this has actually caused all these kind of inconsistencies. But my biggest worry is that we seem to have picked a few lessons, particularly how to link what the Sarah Ruto-led committee was doing and what Fatuma Shege was doing. So out of it, we are now having a situation where groups of children that did not benefit from this COVID, because private schools went into continuous teaching, but public schools were largely left out. There has been recorded massive learning losses. And yet now our reopening strategy does not seem to address the challenges that COVID brought with itself. So we would have hoped that there would have been a clear recovery plan together with a reconstruction plan, But this seems not to be coming. And this is now what is making some of us as stakeholders to be extremely frustrated and extremely worried that
Mr.
this
Otoa, I'd like your take on this
than
one.
even perhaps we had thought.
Mr. Otoa, you're a teacher. You have experienced it firsthand, the closure of school, something that nobody, I think, would have dreamt of. What is your take on the measures that were taken, their necessity, and how they have affected some teachers in quite difficult, bad ways? Because we're having teachers who are trying to make a living working in salons and doing this and that just to make ends meet. So from your perspective as a teacher, from that angle, what do you make of the measure that was taken?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Mwalimu Otoa, on board. You are quite spot on. Some of my colleagues are actually selling samosas for a living. It's been a tough time, and Kaburu's sentiment as a researcher in this area is quite spot on. I cannot agree with him more. But first thing first, Chief. The question that we must ask ourselves is, why did we go into a lockdown? Why did we send our students home? The Swahili people have it that we have eaten the entire cow. It is the tail that is remaining. But since you must be cognizant of one part.
Yes.
It depends with the meticulous nature on how you're going to consume the remaining tail. I just want to give you a very basic scenario.
Yeah.
In Israel and in part of the UK, they did reopen. And even in South Africa, closer home here, they did reopen. And unfortunately, the second spike actually came in. The first thing, or the basic things that I, as a I'm trying to talk about is have we addressed the most fundamental thing? Do a recognized study visit to any of the public schools? And Kaburu is actually talking about some of the private schools are quite in an advantageous position because when you talk of the sanitizers, when you talk of the thermogun, they can quickly, in a split second, have these resources within their limits and allow the students to come even tomorrow.
Right.
But go to some of our state schools, the schools still stay in very sorry state. I want to bring three fundamentals to the very quagmire of reopening of schools. Number one, even if Kaburu talks of social distancing and building of classrooms, and the government is talking of 1 billion shillings that was disbursed, the question is, do we have enough teachers? The other day, I saw that the Teacher Service Commission only advertised for apparently around 15,000 teachers, both for primary and secondary. That's still a drop in the ocean.
Right.
So we still have a challenge over teacher-student ratio. Most of our teachers are actually aging and are clocking 50 plus years. They're very precarious age group.
Yes.
Number two is the question of psychology. I'm just a teacher who is not disconnected. I just don't go to teach English and literature to my students. I must understand their welfare needs. These are hard times even to this age group. Some of them, when they went home, they are going through a lot. The candidate class has been told, you're not going to sit for the exam. Now, it has been a switch on kind of communication. In fact, me as a teacher, I'm highly disappointed by the communication strategy at the Ministry of Education, Jogo House. If there is a communication expert or somebody in charge of communication in that building, he is letting down our good Professor George Magoha.
Right.
Because of the nature of communication they are giving, it's like a ninja kind of communication. So can we first of all address the psychological stature of our boys and girls at home? And also, because I've been in constant touch with them, if you just tell these standard 8 and Form 4 students that you're coming tomorrow, and after 2 or so months, we are going to administer a national assessment to you.
Yeah.
Let me tell you this, if we are not sitting on a time bomb, this is the time you're going to see a lot of shenanigans happen, including the ones we saw where a student took his life in a county I don't want to mention. So let us be very meticulous. Let us approach this thing with sobriety. Are our schools safe for reopening? And I must tell you that is the kind of question that needs a very thorough thinking before we even contemplate reopening of our schools.
Right, and Mr. Kaburu, I'd like you to jump onto that element that he has brought up, the preparedness of the students. We were to wait all the way till January and then approach it as a normal school, with a normal school calendar in mind, but clearly things seem to be changing, and we're told KCPE and KCSE students might be returning earlier. So what is your take on that and that psychological aspect that has been brought up quite well by Mr. Otoa?
Thank you. First of all, I want to differ with my friend, long-time classmate, Otoa. We met the first day we were going to the university, so we have a very long history together. I want to disagree with him that the problems we are having are partly caused because of a lack of PR within the Ministry of Education. Because when we reduce some of these problems to a communication challenge, we seem basically to be normalizing inappropriate approaches and ways through which the ministry has conducted business. Now, is it that schools are safe for reopening, or even households are safe for people to live in? What is happening is that we are living in our houses not because they are safe, but because we are able to put certain things in place. And that is the reason why we are comfortably able to retreat back to our homes.
But can you really compare a school and a
let me just explain this. So the point is that are we in a position to make schools to appear like our homes? The answer is that yes, but it comes at a huge cost, which we cannot afford as a country. That is the point. If as a country we were able to ensure that every child can have a mask, every child has got access to sanitizers, and we can achieve social distancing, we would have reopened schools long time ago. But what is the implication if we were to take that action? So it is not the question of the Ministry of Education failing to communicate, but rather it is the question of the Ministry of Education having either wrong policies, design of those policies, and implementation. And that's why I told you that the Sarah-led task force should equally fit into the Fatuma Shege task force. And I want to give one illustration that explains to you why we have a problem at Jogo House.
Go ahead.
Now, you have got counties such as Marsabit that did not record a single case of COVID-19 as we speak right now. Was it right that we should have closed schools in that particular county? Because these are children who are vulnerable. These are children who are likely to encounter more learning losses than any other place. So we should be asking ourselves, what should we have done to avoid these kind of scenarios altogether? And therefore, it begins to tell us the nature of how the Ministry of Education is designed, whereby there is extreme centralization of everything that should be happening in this country. What should we have done within these 8 months where we have seen that households and communities have played a big role to support children to have some meaningful learning? Now, why I say that we are not addressing the right question is, if today you reopen schools, what are you going to teach children? Are you going to start teaching them from where they left? Or are you going to start something new altogether? What are you going to do with all this knowledge or the lack of knowledge that children have had for the last 6 to 7 months? The point is that the ministry does not have a framework of how to capture all these kind of things so that it harnesses, and in the process, it explains the systemic challenges within the curriculum. Because we saw that parents played a big role in terms of helping their children to learn or not to learn. Are we going to go back to school with the same curriculum that has given us a lot of challenges? Because part of the reason as to why we have got a serious teacher shortage, I am going to use one example to illustrate it.
Yes.
When you have got children in grade 1 being taught 7 subjects, what are you telling us? You need 7 exercise books, you need 7 textbooks, you need a timetable that should be accommodated for the whole day, you need more teachers. So my question is, did we need to load 7 subjects to a child in grade 1? Or could we have negotiated to say a child in grade 1 only needs to know how to read, how to write, and have some additional general information, so that curriculum as it's loaded for children in lower ages could be a little bit cheaper, so that even if you had got one teacher handling all these students, they can even go to school ownership, school system. But what is happening tricks over here, we have got a ministry that is loaded with a lot of functions, some that it has no capacity, including the whole issue of infrastructure. It is not that we cannot achieve infrastructure. The issue is the Ministry of Education does not have the capacity to address the issue of infrastructure in our schools. And that is why more than 100 years since we introduced education, formal education in this country, we do not have a school infrastructure policy in Kenya.
Okay,
what does it mean? This country has not defined what is a school.
Okay.
So how can we proceed if we closed schools for 9 months and we never took lessons to go back and even say that we are going to define what is a small school? Right. And you are telling us that we should reopen by going back to the same old things that we are doing. Honestly, how are you going to mediate a new education that takes us into the 21st century if you are still using the same foundations and the same principles and the same fundamentals for your education? It is disastrous. It is not right. We have to ask these hard questions and take them beyond the mere discussion on the face value of when are we opening schools, or reducing education to a discussion around thermogans and the issue of sanitizers. Let's go to the fundamentals and say that the Ministry of Education has not measured up to the expectation of what is required to provide free and compulsory basic education for all the children. And all means all. All does not mean alternatives. There are no children who deserve and others who don't deserve. We must ask this question. The way the Ministry of Education is conceptualizing, designing, and delivering education, it is setting us up for chaos. Where are we going to raise 800 billion to provide education in the year 2030 if we continue planning and providing education the way we are doing? These are the questions that we should be asking the Cabinet Secretary, not just this question of when are you reopening schools, whether it is September or January. Tell us after we have reopened, what are we going to be teaching those students for that 1 or 2 weeks? What is going to be the role of parents? What is going to be the role of county governments? How could we have schools closed for 9 months and you keep out county governments? County governments have a role to play. Communities have a role to play. Are we going to see this role renegotiated, or we are still going to see the Minister of Education that is overly present, dictating everything that should be happening in every single primary school and letting our parents feel extremely disempowered? This is not right.
Mr. Otoa, please come in and comment on this.
Sure,
do you agree with Mr. Kaburu?
Yeah, Trix, I think my good brother talks like a pastor.
Yes.
Some politician. I used to advise him he could not have ventured into this profession. But most importantly, Trix, I want to tell you most candidly that COVID-19 should have given us very serious lessons.
Yes.
I agree with him partly when he says that this could have been a reflection moment. We as a country, we as the educational stakeholders, should have sat back and reflected seriously on the nature of our school curriculum. What kind of education are we giving to our students? And I just want to single out one item that should have been navigated through even with this very difficult time. And that Trix is the question of assessment.
Yes.
We have for many years leverage on what we call formative assessment. And that's why when the good Professor George Magoha terms 2020 as a year that has been lost, I personally as a teacher will not agree with that semantic as a lost year, because losing is actually on the negative. The lessons that COVID-19 gives us is quite immeasurable. We must go back to the drawing board and re-evaluate the kind of assessment that we must be giving to our students. I have had an opportunity to interact with other global curricula, and I must tell you, when you juxtapose, I want to single out a curriculum like International Baccalaureate. They do not actually put a focus on summative evaluation. In fact, it does not really count a lot. the student's ability over a period of time, tabulated, recorded in the learner portfolio, the skills, the attitudes that actually come out of it, including things such as community action and service, is very, very important. So like Kaburu puts it, COVID-19 should actually teach us very, very crude lessons that going forward, we must rethink our educational system. But I just want to go back to the 2 points that I wanted. Even if Kaburu says that we must not negate and look at the very fundamentals as to why we must reopen schools, there are 2 things, tricks that I want to put through. I want to sympathize and empathize with the Kenyan parents. And I come from these communities where tricks, sometimes you see a family struggle even to get the 3 meals a day. You are telling them that in 2 weeks or so, the daughter or the son is supposed to go back to school. Where has this fella got a school fees all of a sudden? And yet the professor said, we are not going to negotiate anything to do with the school fees that was paid in first term. That is an issue that the government must look at it seriously. Number 2, it is a question of capitation in this country. Kaburu has talked about free and subsidized education system in Kenya. But I'm telling you, tricks, if schools were to reopen tomorrow, I'm telling you most sincerely that the capitation money to hit into the school account will take not less than 3 months or so. How are schools going to survive? We are talking of the BOM teachers as well as support staff teachers who are now languishing in the miasma of abject poverty. Some of them are, their wives have even run out of their matrimonial home because of this situation. We must face reality into the eye and look at the possible workable means. We must not just come here. This country, Kaburu, I must remind you, is not devoid of very good policy. You and I have done education foundation, we have done the philosophy of education, we have done economics of education. The good policies that are gathering dust in the universities, in the ministries, from the basic education to the higher education. It is not that we do not have a deficiency of those section of paper. It is the goodwill of the people that we give the mandate to run our affairs that do not have that particular goodwill. It really pains me to see that a lot of billions are going into wastage in this country. When that poor child in Mandera, when that poor child from Chebukwa village in Bungoma County, where I hail from, is not accessing education. It really pains me a lot. And up until now, I think COVID-19 should not leave us without lessons. If we cannot learn from these things, I think we are the zombies of the 21st century.
We are zombies of the... Okay, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more of this discussion, very impassioned sentiments coming out of these very invested experts on education. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have more for you here on Morning Express.
This is KTN News.